You're welcome to applaud if you want to. Doesn't it feel like we just made it to church now? Oh, thank you, Zacharias, for recording that for us. It feels more like we've gathered here. Let's open to the word of prayer. Father God, thank you so much for this morning. Thank you for the chance that we have to be together, even if it's in a different forum than usual. And thank you for the Sabbath and just a beautiful day to celebrate and to connect with you and connect with others. Please guide us in our conversations this morning, we pray. In your name, amen. Well, it is hard to believe that we are at the end of Thanksgiving week, isn't it? It doesn't feel like Thanksgiving yet to me because it's still so warm and sunny outside, but it's a beautiful day. And I know that, I don't know about you, but I know that I ate a lot this week. I was sharing at the beginning here that I think that for me, Thanksgiving week has really turned into a week of celebration. And somehow I always think it's going to be Thursday day or Thursday where I just really spend a lot of time eating, but the whole week just starts to be filled up with lots of food and time of connecting with other people. And so I hope you guys had a good Thanksgiving, whatever that looked like. Likely it looked different this year for you than in a typical year. But nonetheless, we have this moment to not only eat, but to reflect on things that we're grateful for. And so I thought it'd be kind of fun in process as we're kind of moving through the Thanksgiving reflection of this week. Leading up to today, I had parents send me some clips of their kids telling us things that their kids were thankful for and telling us what they enjoyed about Thanksgiving, what they like to eat. I should have asked them what they don't like to eat. That may have been the more interesting question for these little ones. But I'll just go ahead and share that with you right now. And again, after we go through this, we'll just jump into a Bible study. So give me 1 minute here where I find the video, and I'll share this screen with you as well.
Food. My favorite Thanksgiving dish is Special K-Loaf, which my grandmother makes almost every year.
My favorite Thanksgiving food is cranberry flan.
My favorite Thanksgiving food is pie,
mashed potatoes and gravy.
The mashed potatoes because I usually make them.
Creamed lima beans.
Mashed potatoes. I love mashed potatoes.
Special K-Loaf, mashed potatoes, gravy casserole, and bread.
I think it's green bean bundles.
It's like sweet potato and a marshmallow on top and an orange peel. And my mom makes it and it's really good.
My favorite dish is probably the same thing because it's really good.
And what are you guys thankful for?
I'm thankful that our Papa Noah is here.
What I'm thankful for is friends and family.
Our new chicks and Willow.
My family, including my doggy and Guy.
I'm really thankful for friends and family and my dog Sophie.
Thankful for a very nice place to live and my friends and family.
Very thankful for breaks that I can spend time with family, friends, and listen to some music.
Last night, my aunt and uncle, they gave me and Eden a lot of corn.
And I'm thankful for my dog.
I am thankful for animals. Jesus.
And I'm thankful for both of my crazy little dogs.
All right. Anyway, it's always good to have some cute little kids on the screen. I'm a little bit upset at my own child that was on there. For those of you that were at outdoor church last week, I was sharing my least favorite food of Thanksgiving is creamed lima beans. And what does my oldest say her favorite is? Creamed lima beans. I don't know what's with that. You try to raise up a child good and they go off track, you know? You do the best you can as a parent, but oh well. Anyway, well, like I said, it is hard to believe we've passed this season. And I always feel like, and I was sharing this last week as well, I always feel like once we have passed Thanksgiving, once we hit Friday, or maybe even Thanksgiving Day, to me, I feel like we have a transition in seasons. For me, I'm a purist and I never want to celebrate Christmas too early, but the second Thanksgiving comes, I feel like, you know, the gates are down and we can move into the Christmas season. and I don't have to feel ashamed about it anymore. And I don't have to hold back anymore. I don't have to like change the station, because there's stations playing all Christmas music already, even well before Thanksgiving. And anytime I hit that station, oh, I see a thumbs up. You might be one of these early Christmas people, Mary. as soon as I would land on that station, I would change the channel immediately. Like, nope, it is not time yet. You are not allowed to play Christmas music yet. And so I have tightly controlled it. But I'll tell you what, yesterday, all day long, there was Christmas music playing in the house, all kinds of different genres, because the season is here. So here's the first question I'm going to warm you guys up with. When do you guys start to enter into a Christmas season? When do you allow yourself to celebrate Christmas, whether it's putting up decorations or listening to music or anything like that? Anyone want to share your Christmas time of year?
I'll say that I have, every now and then I get out a Christmas video, music, what have you, all year long.
All year. There is no boundary for you. Anyone else?
Mine starts when Mary starts playing Christmas videos.
Mary, when does this begin?
Whether I like them or not.
Actually, anytime. But if our daughter's here, she will do it kind of any time of the year, but usually maybe a week before Thanksgiving. But then the actual permission is when you see Santa Claus from Macy's parade. You know, that's the official time.
Did he show up this year? I'm not sure what happened at the Macy's parade. Okay, you watched it. I knew that it was a little bit different, but he was there, so we can start officially by her standards. Well, it's funny. I was a little bit nervous, actually, wanting to go into a kind of Christmas message right now, thinking, man, it's actually November. Maybe we can't really launch into a Christmas theme until next week. But I'm getting the sense that you guys have no standards when it comes to protecting the Christmas message. And so it's not too early at all in your book, so I don't have to be afraid. Because what we're doing is we are starting a series, and this isn't exactly part of the series because that's kind of more of a Bible study that we're doing. But coming through from here on out, every time we have a message at the church, we're wanting to start this new series called God with Us, or Emmanuel, God with Us, and looking at that particular part of the Christmas message, because it feels like that's such a big and broad idea of what this message is about. And we could probably, following Mary's example, we could probably preach about this all year round, right? The idea of God with us, but it's such a central part about what it means to celebrate Jesus coming onto this earth. And of course, the prophecy in Isaiah, when we're told that there's this baby that's to be born, this child named Emmanuel, which means God with us. So with that, this isn't going to be our primary book, but I want to think about where that comes from, and that is in Isaiah chapter 7. And I want to look at that and think about the context where we first get this idea of Emmanuel. And so it starts in chapter 7, and think about the context here for a little bit. This is after there's been civil war in Israel. You've got the division between Judah and Israel, and they're operating as different countries. We've got two different kings. And during this reign, we're told that there's an issue that's happening in chapter 7. The issue is there's a big, daunting enemy out there, and that's the Assyrians. And so as the Assyrians are approaching, there's fear about what they may do, and there's fear about the safety that this has for other nations, such as Israel and such as Judah. And we're told that during the reign of Ahaz, this is verse 1, the son of Jotham and grandson of Uzziah, Jerusalem was attacked by King Rezin of Aram and King Pekah of Israel, and the son of Remaliah, and the city withstood the attack, however, and was not taken. But here comes verse 2. The news had come to the royal court, Aram is allied with Israel against us. So the hearts of the king and his people trembled with fear, just as trees shake in a storm. Now here's the issue. The issue is that Syria and Israel are teaming forces against Judah. And the reason why is because they were wanting Judah to align with them to oppose the Assyrians, and Judah was kind of vacillating. They were wavering on this. They weren't really sure whether they were going to join forces or not. And instead, we actually find out in a different place that they were looking at perhaps forming an alliance with Assyria rather than joining forces with these two. And because of all of this, Syria and Israel are now looking at attacking Judah. And Ahaz is shaking with fear in this. Verse 3, then the Lord said to Isaiah, go out to meet King Ahaz, you and your son, Shear-Jashub, and you will find a king, or find the king, at the end of the aqueduct that feeds the water into the upper pool near the road leading to the field where cloth is bleached. Tell him to stop worrying. Tell him he doesn't need to fear the fierce anger of those two burned out embers. And so this is the context when we're thinking about where the story or where this idea of Emmanuel comes from. It starts with this story where Isaiah is coming to King Ahaz, and he's coming to give him a message of telling him not to worry. Don't be afraid. And in this message, the dialogue is, if you read through the chapter, what you find out is God offers Ahaz a sign. He's like, listen, if you want to know that you don't have to be afraid, if you want to know that I am in control of the situation, ask me for a sign, anything you want, make it as hard as you want the sign to be, I'll give it to you, and then you can know that I'm in control. And Ahaz, perhaps with some false piety here, says, no, I don't need a sign. I'm totally good without a sign. The reason why I say false piety is because when you read throughout the accounts of him in 1 Kings and Chronicles, you realize that he's not a great king, and he's not a godly king. In fact, he's kind of the opposite. But regardless, we're told that there's going to be a sign that's given. I'll start with verse 12 where he refuses. In verse 12, he says, the king refused. No, he said, I wouldn't test the Lord like that. But then Isaiah said, listen, you royal family of David. You aren't satisfied to exhaust my patience. You exhaust the patience of God as well. All right, then the Lord himself will choose the sign. Look, the virgin will conceive a child. She will give birth to a son and will call him Emmanuel. God is with us. And here is where we first hear this promise, Emmanuel. Now, our way of looking at this is that there was two signs being fulfilled. One is something happened presently, right? Because the idea of Jesus being born, this is way after the time of Ahaz. This isn't going to really answer any questions for him. But we think that there was a sign that was given locally. We don't know who the child was. We don't have a record of what this looked like, but some kind of birth situation, some child grows up, and this is the sign to Ahaz. But of course, we also look at this, and we see this as a prophetic word about a different child that's going to be born. So there's a type here that we're looking at. And this different child is identified when we get to Matthew. And Matthew, as he's connecting all the dots from the Old Testament, starting off in chapter 1, as soon as he's talking about the birth of Jesus, he says, this is how we see the words of Isaiah fulfilled, is through Jesus, because he is Emmanuel. This is the fulfillment, the true fulfillment, the deeper fulfillment of this idea from Isaiah. And of course, when you look at these two situations of Jesus being born and the original situation with Emmanuel, there seems to be a deep connection to our world right now. And that is the idea of this name that literally means God with us is an answer to the fears that we have. It's an answer to the fears that we have about the uncertainties that face us. That's how it started with Ahaz. He's looking at some uncertainty. He's looking at some threats that he's facing. And the answer to that is this name Emmanuel, where God is with us. But then you fast forward to Jesus, and this is the ultimate answer. And it's the fulfillment that we can all feel, that the answer to the fears that we have is the same idea that God is with us. And there's something about that, isn't that? There's something about this idea of somebody being with you to answer the fears of life. Have you ever had a situation, I'm going to ask you a question here in a second, but have you ever had a situation where somebody being with you made you feel less fearful? I'll tell you two examples for me, and then I'm going to open it up here as you think about this. Have you ever had an experience where somebody being with you made you less fearful? When I was a little child, I wanted to go camping. I had never gone camping before. I was really young, young elementary. And we get this idea, my sister and I, that we were going to set up a tent in our backyard. And, it wasn't anything special, just like a sheet draped over a string. And we kind of set up like a sleeping area. And I was going to sleep back there with her and maybe my parents. I didn't know like what the whole plan was, but my parents gave the rubber stamp and it was going to be this great experience. I was excited because it seemed like camping. But come evening, when the sun starts to set and everything's getting really dark, first of all, my parents bailed and they said, no way, we're sleeping in our own bed. Like, we're not sleeping in the backyard. And so that put a damper on it, but I knew my sister would still sleep back there with me. But then eventually she pulled the string too. And she's like, no way, I don't want to sleep out there. Because there's like bobcats out in the woods behind us, like strange noises that were made. And so my parents still told us, we lived in a kind of rural setting. They felt like it was a pretty safe place to be. They told me I was welcome to sleep back there by myself. But there's no way. I think I was probably 7 or 6. I was like, there's no way I'm sleeping out there all by myself, because I didn't have anybody with me to sleep out there. And I can guarantee you, like, if my dad had slept back there, there would have been nothing scary about my backyard. My backyard was not a scary place to be, even at night. But if no one's with you, and you're 6 or 7, it's still a scary thing. Or like that's the physical witness. Like if someone just walks a path with you, sometimes even as an adult, it can make things feel less scary. Maybe you're walking through some sketchy neighborhoods in the inner city. If you're walking by yourself, you might feel a little bit more tense. If you have some people with you, you probably don't feel that nervous anymore. It kind of reduces that anxiety. But sometimes it's also more of an experiential sort of situation. Have you ever had a situation where you're going through something hard? Maybe it's a loss of some type. Maybe you went through a miscarriage. Maybe you lost a parent. Maybe it's through some kind of financial hardship where you're losing a home, or whatever it is, or maybe you lost a job. If you ever find someone who shares a similar experience, if you ever comes across someone who says, me too, right? Like I too have experienced this. I've walked that road. There's something that just feels like a weight off your shoulders. If you know someone else has a common shared experience and you don't feel as alone in the journey, it really takes a weight off. So that's the question I want to ask. Can you think of a time where somebody being with you, whether it was in a physical kind of sense or in an emotional, experiential sense, helped reduce that fear and that anxiety in your life? Can someone share a time when someone being with you made you feel better about your situation? Yeah, Dennis.
It's hard to choose which one, but I'll choose one a number of years ago. I think I was in college or something. We were teenagers. My brother and I went to, our family used to go to Disney. And this sounds kind of dorky actually, but some of the rides can be rather intense. I think we were in the animal park, the zoo one, and there's a ride there that you used to get on and they'd kind of terrorize you with these dinosaurs trying to attack the little vehicle that you're riding in. And I remember I was with my brother, and I was sort of the panicking one, freaking out. And it was good knowing he was there. I don't know, made the ride less intense. I still don't know why I got so freaked out. He kind of wondered about me too, I think. It was just good to have him along for the ride. So
I'd like to get his perspective on your fear of that.
Well, that could get really funny.
That's good. Anyone else? Anyone else want to share a time where someone being with you made you feel less fearful, or lightened the experiential load?
Yesterday, Thursday, I discovered we had a water leak over here in front of the girls' dorm. And so I dug it up, and it was a 3-inch main that has a problem on it. So I called in the guy that had actually put the line in. Sure, I could probably have taken it apart and put it back together again myself. But it sure is so much easier when there's somebody else there to help that probably has done it more frequently than I have, even though he's a younger man than I. But it still is comforting to take somebody along with the journey, and if that thing blows apart, you've got somebody else to blame.
Yeah, I like that. Not just for the journey, but you have someone else to blame too. It's not just me; it was all of us. I resonate with that one. Well, one thing that a text that comes to mind when I'm thinking about the idea of Jesus coming to this earth and the idea that it means God was with us, I think of the passage in Hebrews chapter 4, where it talks about us having a high priest, but not having one who can't empathize with the world that we live in, empathize with our weakness. And so it's more than just simply he showed up and he was here, but he walked the same kind of path that we walk. He experienced the same kind of things that we experience. And because he came here, we can know that he understands, right? And we think about God as being all-knowing anyway, and so you would think, well, God can just know. God is all-knowing. But it's so much more tangible to know he actually walked the walk and he experienced it with us. And I feel like that gives us some kind of perspective about the life that we're going through. So with all of that, there's a particular story in the Bible that I feel like really encapsulates this idea for me in kind of a tangible way of what it means for God to be with us. And that comes in, several of the Gospels, but I'm going to look at the account in Mark chapter 4. And you know the story well. It's the story of Jesus calming the storm. One of my favorite stories. It's a classic. I feel like there's a lot of lessons in it. So, I almost get overwhelmed. You look at a story like this, and it's like, which direction should we go? But let's look at it anyway. Mark chapter 4, and I'll start with verse 35. Mark 4:35. As evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's cross to the other side of the lake." He was already in the boat, so they started out, leaving the crowds behind, although the other boats followed. But soon a fierce storm arose. High waves began to break into the boat until it was nearly full of water. Now Jesus was asleep in the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. And frantically they woke him up, shouting, "Teacher, don't you even care that we are going to drown?" When he woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the water, "Quiet down." And suddenly the wind stopped, and there was a great calm. And he asked them, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still not have faith in me?" And they were filled with awe and said among themselves, "Who is this man that even the waves obey him?" There's a lot to look at this here. The first part of the story, let me just get to the part that bugs me about this story. Can I share that part? The part that bugs me about this story is that Jesus is asleep. And when I say it bugs me, it's because I just can't understand it. I try to picture the scene. I'm trying to imagine. Before it says that he's asleep, it says that this fierce storm arose. There's high waves that began to break into the boat until it was nearly full of water. And yet it says the next verse, Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat. I don't get that. If there's any part, I have an easier time looking at the story of Jonah being swallowed by a whale or fish, right? That makes more sense to me, the idea that this fish could just gobble this guy down versus Jesus sleeping in the boat. And this is coming from a guy who is a really good sleeper. I mean, like, I feel like this is one of my spiritual gifts. I can sleep anywhere, anytime, and so fast. I don't know what that's a sign of, but I do well at sleeping. Case in point, Valerie always points this out as sort of the curse of being married to me, because she is not as good of she's not gifted in the same kind of way. Narcolepsy. Thank you. Thank you, Pastor Don. That's his diagnosis right now. But like, for sometimes it doesn't work well for her, because if we go to bed at the same time, or even worse, she'll sometimes go to bed before me, and then, you know, I stay up reading, and then I'll jump in bed after that, and she's still awake, and I'll still beat her to falling asleep, and that makes her not happy. But the one that she always tells on me is when we had a newborn. So we'd had Jocelyn already, and Aubrey, our second one, was a newborn baby. And as you know, like, you have the first child and it really beats you up a little bit. It kind of causes some awareness of, oh man, life is totally different. And you're trying to like juggle the whole thing of sleeping and whatever. And then you have child number 2, and you suddenly realize, whoa, wait a second. It wasn't that bad after all when we just had the one. And suddenly, like, sleep becomes a really precious commodity, and it gets kind of hard to, you know, anyway, the 2 of them were kind of close together. And so Jocelyn was still a handful, still pretty much a baby herself. Then you bring home the new baby, and suddenly Jocelyn seems like a young adult. And you're looking at this young little baby, like, what do I do with this child? And we were just like struggling a little bit, and particularly Valerie, because she's feeding the baby, she's waking up all times of the night, and she's not getting good sleep. So I decided I'm going to give her a little bit of a break, and I offered to take Aubrey into a different room so that she could get a sound sleep until it was actually time to feed the baby. Because you know how it is sometimes, you know, the baby wakes up and they don't really need to be fed yet, but they're just kind of like tossing and turning, but the mom's on hyper alert, so she's fully awake. Do I need to feed the baby? No. And so it was good, like, it was really disruptive for Valerie. And so I took Aubrey downstairs. We had an upstairs bedroom at the time, and I took her downstairs in this little bassinet, and I sat her right by the couch, and I just slept on the couch because I can sleep anywhere. And so I just tucked myself in. Aubrey was sound asleep. Next thing you know, I was sound asleep. And the idea was, once she really woke up and was crying, then I would bring her up to Valerie and let her feed her, then take her back down, and again, give Valerie a little bit of a break. Well, Aubrey did start crying, and she starts waking up, and I didn't hear a thing. Like, I'm sleeping right next to this baby, and she is crying her heart out, and I just slept right through it, had no clue. Eventually, it got so bad that it woke up Valerie upstairs, door closed, in the bedroom with a noisemaker on. She hears her newborn child screaming. I'm thinking, what happened to David? Like, did he just abandon the child? Walks all the way downstairs to find the child, and there I am, sound asleep next to Aubrey. So I saved her nothing. I made her life worse, because now she had to journey across the house to get to the baby. But the point is that I am a good sleeper. Like, I can sleep anywhere. But even when I look at this story and I think about Jesus sleeping in the boat while waves are crashing over the boat, it makes no sense to me, right? It doesn't seem to make sense. And we know that it's a bad storm. Let's be real about this. This is, besides the fact that it sounds like the boat is nearly ready to sink, we look at the reaction of the disciples. And sometimes, I feel like sometimes we come down hard on these guys, because we're like, man, why were they so afraid of this situation right here? Why were they afraid of sinking? Like, weren't these guys experienced? Well, first of all, we'll say, like, well, they've already seen miracles of Jesus. Like, we've already seen that Jesus is powerful. So first of all, they've got Jesus with them. But second of all, we know at least 4 of them were professional fishermen. Like, they've had a lot of experience out on the boats. So why are they afraid at the situation? Shouldn't they just kind of man up, get the boat under control, wake up Jesus if they need to, and be okay? But I kind of look at it on the other side of things, that if these guys are afraid, like, if the disciples are afraid, this is probably really bad. This is probably a really, really bad storm. It's kind of like, if you ever like around a professional of some kind who knows more about you or more about things than, well, I'll give you an example. Like a medical professional. Like, I don't know much about medicine, right? And so if I was around like a medical professional and I'm describing symptoms, or even worse, if I had a major injury, you kind of start looking to them and reading their face. And if they look like they're freaking out a little bit, if the medical professional is nervous about the situation, if they're looking at you like you're about ready to die, then you get really worried. If they look calm, then you feel kind of calm. And so I kind of look at it in the same way that I'm looking at the disciples saying, listen, if they're calm, if they're okay in this storm, then I understand that it's probably just a storm. And sure, there's bad storms that come around, but they're used to this and they're okay. But if they're upset, if they're freaking out, then I know that this is probably a really bad scenario. And maybe we could even go so far as saying that it's unprecedented, right? Like maybe this is a kind of storm that they've been in a lot of storms before, but this is an unprecedented kind of storm, and they're feeling nervous because of that. And I use that word because you've heard that word a lot this year, haven't you? Have you ever heard the word unprecedented? We're living in unprecedented times. I was just watching a video last night that was kind of a reflection on 2020, and the way they phrased it was, this like not only is it unprecedented times, but we've heard the word unprecedented used unprecedented amounts because we're always saying it, and it's true. Like we're all saying it to each other. Like this, we've never been through this kind of year before. And so I just, when I thought of that word in this context, it just really struck me of how appropriate this story is for our time. Because we are kind of living in an unprecedented time, at least for me. I'm assuming a lot of you have not experienced what we're experiencing. I know you haven't actually. And so with that, whenever you're facing something you haven't faced before, the natural feeling that you get is fear. And you start to have some worries, and you start to worry about what the future looks like and what's on the other side, of the tunnel, like where we're passing through. What are things going to look like when we get through this thing? And of course, it's kind of underscored right now because here we are back online again, and we haven't done that in a while. It's, for a long time, it felt like things were kind of getting back to sort of like a new normal. And then suddenly you start to feel like, well, maybe we're in our third wave, fourth wave, second wave. I don't know what wave we're in at this point. I've kind of lost track. But you start to feel that sense of instability in life. And then you start to question what the future looks like. And again, you feel that fear. And so in response to this, I want to look at verse 38 again. Jesus, he was sleeping in the back of the boat with his head on a cushion, and frantically they wake him up shouting, "Teacher, don't you even care that we are going to drown? Don't you even care that we are going to drown?" It's kind of a revealing question, isn't it? I mean, I think my first question is, Jesus, how can you be asleep? Like, aren't you drenched by now? Jesus, waves are washing over you. Well, why are you asleep? And of course, a lot of sermons will go down this path of like, well, why is Jesus asleep? Which is because he has such assurance of God's control over the situation. And that he has such peace in life that it doesn't matter what storm he's facing. He's at this constant even. And maybe that's it. I don't know. The Bible doesn't really reveal what's going on here. But the question that they jump into is, don't you even care about the situation that we're in? And isn't that the question that's most pressing? Or one of the questions that's most pressing is, does God really care about the thing that you're going through right now? And the reality is we spend a lot of time, a lot of ink has been spilled talking about 2020, about the pandemic, about all the social unrest, about the political dynamics going on right now. But the reality is, I'm guessing for most of you, the bigger issues in life still are more personal than that. The bigger issues that keep you up at night still to this day probably have more to do with the health of your kids, have more to do with your own financial stability, have more to do with the fear, the worry of some loved one of yours and their spiritual connection with God. These are the kind of things that probably are the things that really actually impact you more. And maybe the greater things that society's wrestling with right now. They might be changing and informing your life at the moment. They might be having a cause and effect sort of scenario. But the reality is a lot of us are hyper-focused on very personal things about ourselves, about our loved ones, about our own security. And the question that we're often asking is, does God care? Like, is this something that he cares about? Has he forgotten about the situation that we're in? And so I kind of feel like when we're talking about the idea of God being with us, it's kind of divided into different sort of categories. The first question is is he even there, right? And that's one question that we sometimes have to wrestle with. Like, do I still believe that God is present? Do I still believe that God is in control? Do I still believe that God is connected to this world that he created, or that he even created the world in the first place? Because all of that creates a sort of worldview of God being with us. But even once we believe that God is with us, the next question is, does he care? Does he care about the thing that you're going through? Does he care about the thing that's not letting you sleep at night? Does he care about the things that are close to your heart? And of course, if we take the Bible at face value, we know he does, right? Like, we know in Matthew 10, it talks about the sparrow, like not one sparrow falling to the ground without God being aware of it. Yet don't be afraid. And again, we come back to this fear, but don't be afraid, because you're more valuable to God than a whole flock of sparrows. But the question is, are we experiencing that idea of care? Like, have we found a way to just experience God's care in our life so that we kind of know it? Because apparently, when things get rough for the disciples, they don't feel it. Like, they know he's there. They've heard this parable from Jesus perhaps before. They know this idea of him caring about them. But in the heat of the moment, they don't know it. And then the third idea of God being with us is, do we believe in his actual ability to change the situation that we're in? Because I think sometimes we know it, right? Like, I think sometimes we know that God's there. Like, or at least we intellectually believe it. We believe that God exists. We believe that he created the world. We believe that he didn't just like wind it up and set it off on its own, that he's still interconnected here, that he's still actively participating in the world that we live in. We believe he cares. Like, we read through the life of Jesus, we see the heart of God, and we believe he's a caring God. But at some level, even though we think we believe in his abilities, we might not actually truly trust his abilities. And, like, you look at this situation here, like, clearly God has the ability, when he wants to rebuke this storm and to stop it in its path. But do we actually think he's going to do it? Like, I think we talked about this summer when we were talking through the prayers that we pray. And when you think about it, sometimes our prayers are revealing about what we actually expect God to do in our lives. Do you ever say a prayer and you tag on that kind of end, if it's your will, or like if it's God's will? And it's not really about God's will, but it's more of like creating this kind of outlet for God, like an excuse, a way out, so that when the prayer is not answered and you're expecting it not to be answered, then you won't be crushed with it. Do you ever kind of like limit the way that you pray because you don't actually expect God to fully intervene in a situation? Like, we kind of like pray a prayer of blessing and grace over someone's life, but we don't actually expect it to change the outcome, because sometimes we don't actually believe that God still has the ability to change the situation that we're in. I mean, we kind of believe it, right? We believe it for little things that are easy to just sort of like appear. So I'll pray like, God, help me find my keys, and I actually expect him to help me find my keys, because that doesn't take anything great for God to do. But when I'm actually asking God for healing, whether that's spiritual healing or physical healing, I sometimes don't think I actually believe it, I don't believe in that ability. And so what good is God being with us if we just don't actually believe that witness has a real impact on our lives? And the story of the storm shows us that God's not just simply there. God doesn't still just simply care, but he also has the ability to control the outcome of what we're living. And so when we look into the future and we don't know what it looks like, when we look into, whatever kind of disruption we're facing in the world around us, if we believe these three things, that he is with us, that he cares, and that he still has the ability to impact the fallout, the reality of where the things go, then the fear and the anxiety can be dramatically reduced. Maybe to the point where we're getting sleepy like Jesus, I don't know. But it can at least be dramatically reduced so that we don't have the same kind of fear that we had prior. There's one little thing I want to look at before we get to kind of the closing bit, and that's in verse 38, or not verse 38, in verse 39. When he wakes up, he rebukes the wind. He rebukes the wind and tells it to quiet down, and it immediately happens. I find it interesting, this idea of Jesus rebuking it. And I've heard some pastors talk about this in terms of, like, what do you rebuke? You don't rebuke neutral, amoral things. You rebuke or neutral, morally neutral things, but you rebuke evil spirits. And this idea that it was more than just simply a normal storm, but a supernatural event taking place. Something trying to impede the progress of where they were headed. And this is an interesting concept to think about. The idea that it wasn't just simply a natural storm that arose, but it was something that was actually there to negatively impact the journey, the destination of where they were headed. And of course, we know to some degree, I'm never super comfortable when people start talking too much about this was an evil spirit or that was an evil spirit. But at the same time, we also know that we don't fight against flesh and blood, right? We know that we are living in a place, in a world where there is a spiritual warfare, and there are things that are trying to block our spiritual growth and things that are trying to block our spiritual effectiveness. And so it's not just simply always about a matter of survival or just simply being able to exist a happy, blissful life. But the framework we should be looking at this is from a spiritual framework of, am I living in a spiritually effective way as a follower of Jesus? And so one of the questions I think sometimes when you feel disruption, when you feel fear, and you feel things that are oppressive, is how are these things impacting the spiritual journey that I'm supposed to be walking? Is this something that's been a moment of growth for me? Is this something that's leading me where God wants me to go? Even if I'm feeling like some kind of trial, like, is this still something that's allowing me to be used by God? Or somehow are these external pressures changing the thing that I'm supposed to be doing? Is it negatively impacting the way that I'm walking spiritually? Because the interesting thing here, when you look at the story of where they were headed, chapter 5, is they were on a mission. I don't know whether they knew they were on a mission yet or not, but the next thing that they go to is chapter 5 is the healing of the demon-possessed man. And this is a huge story, not only because you just see the power of God, not only over the storm, but now directly over demonic forces, but because this man gets saved. And it's a beautiful story for him. He's rescued from his place, from his moment of stress, but then also he goes back into his town and he is a witness to his town, and who knows how much his life impacts the life of others. And if they were to give up in this moment, instead of the storm just being there and causing them to turn around, if they were to give up and turn around and go back to where they came from, and they didn't have this interaction here, who knows how much things would be different in this town where this man lives. And so they are on a journey to do something that God has called them to do, and the storm is acting as a barrier to that happening. And the reason why they're able to get through the storm is because Jesus is with them, and he cares, and he has the ability to stop things, and he has the ability to keep them on path, to keep them on track, to going where they were going originally. So, application time. You're thinking about this in our lives right now. Like, what are the storms that we are facing? What are the things that we're facing on our journey in life that are sometimes causing us, A, to be fearful, but then B, maybe changing our course, maybe changing our direction, when we need to be thinking about what is it that God has called us to do. And whatever God has called you to do, no storm can stop you from doing. It doesn't matter what kind of trial you're facing. It doesn't matter what kind of uncertainty you've come across. It doesn't matter what kind of roadblocks you have. If God's called you to something, you're still called to do it. It might slow you down. It may change the way things look, but the calling is still there. And I believe that we all have calling in our lives. I think of Ephesians chapter 2, where it says that we have been created to do good works. It doesn't say that some of us have been created to do good works. It doesn't say that some of us have this high calling, but all of us, we've been created to do something, to be called to some kind of good works. And I think sometimes in life we get to this place where we start feeling passive. Either we get to back to 2020, sometimes we hit 2020 and there's this idea that this year's a lost year, and so we just kind of give up on it. We'll just wait till 2021 and hope things get better. And then maybe 2020 or 2021's no better, and so then we kind of give up on that year, and we just find ourselves biding time, waiting for the next thing to come. But he's called you for good works right now. And the storms of life are not supposed to slow you down and change your course. You're still called in the same way by the God who's with us. Or sometimes I think it's a stage of life scenario. Like there's some times in life where, maybe you've lived a while, maybe you've hit kind of the peak career years, and then you just see yourself kind of in the sunset years fading away. And there's this idea that, that was a good run while it lasted, but those days are behind me now. But I believe that all of us are still called to good works right now. And we don't just sit here biding time while the world still exists, but we're called to action right now. So the question that we have in our hearts are what is it that God is calling you to do in the present time, in the moment? What are your abilities that he's given you? What are the strengths that he's given you? And how can they be utilized in a way to continue the good works that God has called you to? All of this, I feel like, centers around this story of Emmanuel, because that message continues to ring true right now, that God is with you. He's with us. And it doesn't matter what it is that we're going through. We know it's there, and we know that he cares, and we know that he still has the ability to affect the outcome. But we also know that we have been called to do something in this world. And it's through the God with us message that we have the power to actually continue through the tunnel, through to the other side, through the storm, to continue the things that he's called us to do. So with that, I'm going to close with a word of prayer. And then I'm going to let Charles close us out with a closing song on the organ. Let's pray. Father God, thank you for this message that you've given us. It's a message that we celebrate not just this time of year, but every time of year, that you came into this world to show us that you are with us, that you can understand the things that we go through, that you empathize with the things that we go through, but that you also still care, and that you've called us to something beyond the storm, beyond the uncertainty that we live right now, and that we are to continue to move in that direction. We're to continue to move in the direction that you called us and to do the things that you want us to do. We pray in the name of Jesus. Amen. Well, hey, thank you guys for joining us. It's good to see your faces, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you next Sabbath and throughout the week. But with this, like I said, let's close with a song for Charles, and then after that, we're dismissed. Have a happy Sabbath.